Hey there, friend. I hope you and your family are safe, healthy, and holding each other close these days. Because what I'm about to share with you might shake the very foundation of what you believe about justice. Let me ask you something. Can money really buy everything, even justice? In a city where skyscrapers gleam like polished gold and money flows through every crevice of the system, there was one woman who seemed to own it all. Not just the buildings or the businesses, but the people, the silence, and the fear. Her name, Veronica Langston, a woman with charm like velvet and a mind as sharp as steel. She didn't inherit her empire, she built it, brick by brick, lie by lie. And she didn't build it on love or compassion. No, Veronica's kingdom rose from bribes, manipulation, and the quiet silencing of anyone who dared to stand in her way. You see, for Veronica, control wasn't just power, it was everything. But this time, she stepped into the wrong courtroom, and waiting for her, there was Judge Malcolm Grant, a man no amount of wealth could buy, a man raised by a mother who lost everything to a crooked system, a man who knew what it meant to be invisible, powerless, and that man made himself a promise a long time ago, that no matter how high the money reached, no matter how loud the power screamed, justice would speak louder. So when Veronica Langston strutted into courtroom 247, heels clicking like thunder on marble floors, eyes gleaming with smug confidence, it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. She smiled like the verdict was already hers, but Malcolm didn't blink. He looked her in the eye and said, steady and clear, "In this courtroom, justice is not for sale." And just like that, the curtain rose on a battle that wasn't just between two people, but between two worlds, one forged in fear and greed, the other rooted in truth and sacrifice. This was more than a trial, this was war. Veronica Langston didn't play fair. When her name first hit the headlines, tied to corruption, coercion, and unspeakable abuse of power, the city didn't flinch. They'd seen it all before, but not like this. Because Veronica didn't just game the system, she owned it. For over a decade, she had built an empire laced with fear and stitched together with silence. She paid off officials, buried evidence, and reminded every witness that silence was the safest choice. And now, with her name tied to an explosive corruption case, she was ready to show the city why people never challenged her and walked away untouched. The threat started quietly. A single mother who had agreed to testify woke up to find a note taped to her front door. 5 chilling words scrawled across crisp white paper. "Think about your children. Accidents happen." She dropped out of the case the next morning, didn't say a word. Another witness, an aging high school teacher, began receiving late-night phone calls. No voice, just breathing. And every few nights, headlights would pierce through his living room blinds, lingering outside long enough to send a message. Stay quiet or suffer. But threats weren't Veronica's only weapon. For the right price, she could make a mountain disappear into mist. Detective Nathan Hale, once considered one of the city's best, now sat comfortably in Veronica's pocket. Files vanished. Witness statements never existed. One by one, the pieces of the prosecution's case dissolved like sugar in hot tea. Even the police force wasn't immune. Warrants were mysteriously delayed. Surveillance tapes went missing. And phone logs? Well, they were just incomplete. It wasn't sloppy, it was precise, surgical. Veronica didn't just influence the system, she became the system. And when money and fear failed, she pushed harder. A young accountant named Terrell, barely 28, quiet, introverted, brilliant, discovered an irregular transfer tied to one of Veronica's shell companies. Before he could submit a report, his car skidded off the road in what was called an unfortunate accident. He survived, but barely, and he wouldn't speak. A fire broke out in a secure evidence storage facility 1 week later. Fire department said it was an electrical fault. Investigators knew better. The only hard drive with unredacted financial ledgers, gone. She was always one step ahead, always watching, and she made sure people knew it. At a private dinner, in a room filled with city council members, CEOs, and police commissioners, she raised her glass and smiled. "Let them try," she said. "This city runs on my money. No one crosses me without paying the price." The room roared with laughter, not joy, compliance. To them, this wasn't justice, it was theater. And Veronica Langston always starred as the lead, but not everyone in the city was playing by her script. Judge Malcolm Grant didn't scare easily. Late into the night, he sat alone in his chambers, a worn photograph of his mother resting between his fingers. Her eyes, kind but sharp, stared back at him. Her voice echoed in his memory. "Son, don't just wear that robe, earn it." She had raised him in a neighborhood that the city had forgotten. Cracked sidewalks, broken schools, sirens instead of lullabies. She lost everything in a housing scandal orchestrated by men like Veronica Langston. He never forgot. Now, her son was presiding over the most high-profile case of his career, and the weight of it sat heavy on his shoulders. That day, when he returned from court, there was an envelope waiting on his desk. No stamp, no return address. Inside, just a single line typed in block letters, "Back off or pay the price." Malcolm didn't flinch. He simply folded the note, placed it in a drawer beside his mother's photo, and picked up the phone. Not to the police, not to security, to Sofia Moreno. Sofia was no stranger to pressure. As an assistant district attorney, she had faced intimidation, threats, even isolation. But this case, this was different. "This is a war, Malcolm," she told him the night she came to his office. "And we're going to need more than subpoenas to win it." He nodded, and together they began their quiet crusade. Sofia went to work like a soldier, meticulous, unflinching, relentless. She peeled back the layers of Veronica's empire, offshore accounts, phony charities, forged signatures, rigged city contracts. The more she uncovered, the deeper the rot became. But Veronica wasn't idle. A motel clerk who had agreed to hand over documents suddenly forgot he'd seen anything. A journalist who had been preparing a piece on Veronica's lobbying network received a cease and desist letter, followed by an anonymous tip that her husband was having an affair. It was dirty, calculated, and then it got physical. One night, after 3 straight days of compiling evidence, Sofia parked outside a rundown motel where a new witness had agreed to meet her. The neighborhood was quiet, but not empty. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. She felt it before she saw it. Instinct. One of them reached for her briefcase, the other for her arm. "Get away from me," she yelled, twisting hard and slamming a car door between them. The struggle was quick, violent, then headlights, a passing vehicle. The men disappeared like smoke. Sofia stood breathless, hand trembling as she clutched the briefcase to her chest. The evidence was still intact. So was she, but just barely. When Malcolm heard what had happened, he didn't just feel fear, he felt fire. He walked to his window, stared out at the city that raised him, and whispered, "She won't scare us off." Not this time. That night, Sofia handed him the files. Bank transfers, names, offshore corporations tied directly to Langston Industries. It was the first time they could see the full picture. The trail was no longer just suspicion. It was hard, undeniable proof. But something was still missing. The why. And that answer came from someone no one expected. Rebecca Langston had always lived in the shadow of her sister's empire. While Veronica basked in headlines and wielded influence like a sword, Rebecca remained in the background, quiet, loyal, and complicit. She wasn't just a bystander. She was the co-signer on the early accounts, the silent hand on the contracts, the one who smoothed the edges when things got too messy. For years, she told herself it was survival. For years, she told herself she was helping build something powerful. But over time, power became cruelty, and that cruelty started keeping her up at night. She had watched families lose their homes, their livelihoods, their dignity, all because her sister refused to lose. One day, she walked into her living room, set her coffee down, and stared at the folder she had locked away for over a decade. It held everything: bank transfers, internal memos, handwritten notes with initials only she and Veronica understood. She touched the edges with trembling fingers. This wasn't just evidence. This was betrayal. But silence had already cost too much. That evening, Rebecca picked up the phone with shaking hands and dialed a number she had never used before. When Judge Malcolm Grant answered, his voice was calm but cautious. "I have something you need to see," she said, her voice low, "and you'll want to see it tonight." In a secured room at the courthouse, Rebecca sat across from Malcolm and Sofia. She didn't look like the sister of a billionaire. She looked like a woman unraveling. Her voice cracked as she laid the folder on the table. "These are the real ledgers," she said. "Not the ones the auditors saw. These are the accounts Veronica used to move the money, offshore under aliases, some disguised as non-profit donations." Sofia flipped through the pages slowly, her jaw tightening. Rebecca didn't cry, but she looked like someone who had cried for years in silence. "Why now?" Malcolm asked gently. "You could have stayed out of it." Rebecca paused. The words came slowly, like she had to fight her own guilt just to say them. "Because I've seen what she's become, and I've seen what I've allowed. I used to believe I was protecting our family, but all I was doing was enabling her to destroy other people's families." She looked up, eyes wet but steady. "I won't do it anymore." Sofia glanced at Malcolm. This was it, the break they needed. Rebecca stood to leave, but stopped at the door. Her voice dropped. "She's going to hate me for this, but maybe that's the price of finally doing the right thing." As she stepped out into the night, a light drizzle had begun to fall, cold, cleansing. Rebecca walked with her head bowed, but her steps were steady. For the first time in her life, she had chosen truth over blood. And the system that had once belonged to Veronica Langston was beginning to slip out of her grasp. The morning started like any other. But as prosecutor Sofia Monroe rounded the corner toward the courthouse records room, her steps slowed. Something was wrong. Acrid smoke lingered in the hallway. She pushed open the door and froze. The room had been gutted. Charred files littered the ground. Blackened shelves collapsed against each other. Burnt plastic clung to melted hard drives like twisted vines. The fire was no accident. Her heart pounded as she stepped through waterlogged papers and ash. Then, just near the far corner, she spotted a folder, singed at the edges but still intact. She dropped to her knees. Inside were fragments, ledgers, names, account numbers. Some of it had survived. It was enough. She gripped it tight. "They tried to burn the truth," she whispered, "but it's still here." Back in her office, still shaken, Sofia's phone buzzed. An anonymous email. No subject, just a video file attached. She clicked it. The screen flickered to grainy footage, a dimly lit parking garage, a hidden camera, and then Detective Nathan Hale, standing stiffly. Opposite him stood a woman Sofia knew too well, Veronica Langston. Even through the poor resolution, her presence was unmistakable, calm, poised, commanding. The audio crackled faintly, but Sofia caught the words. "Take care of it," Veronica said. Nathan nodded, slipping an envelope into his coat. The video cut off, but the meaning didn't. Veronica wasn't just manipulating things from the shadows. She was orchestrating them. The email had no name, no note, just a silent warning, or a gift from someone inside her crumbling empire. Sofia forwarded the clip to Judge Grant with one line. "We need to talk." An hour later, Malcolm Grant arrived, the video already playing as he entered. He didn't speak, not at first. He simply stared. By the end, his jaw was tight, his hands balled into fists. "This isn't just desperation," he finally said. "This is Veronica trying to remind us who she thinks runs the city." Sofia nodded. Her voice was calm, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "She's wrong. This changes everything." Malcolm stood, his voice low, decisive. "Then it's time to use it." They both knew the stakes. Veronica's web of control stretched far and deep. The fire wasn't just about destroying records. It was about sending a message, but this video was louder. The truth had survived the flames, and now it had a voice. The courtroom buzzed with tension so thick you could feel it in your bones. Every seat was filled, every breath was held, and all eyes were locked on the man in handcuffs seated at the witness stand. Detective Nathan Hale, once considered untouchable, now disheveled, shackled, and alone. He didn't look at Veronica Langston, who sat at the defense table. Her posture was rigid, her eyes downcast, her expression unreadable. But everyone in the room could feel it. Something was about to break. Sofia Monroe stood, composed and focused. "Detective Hale," she began, her voice razor-sharp but measured, "can you confirm your involvement in the destruction of evidence related to this case?" Hale's eyes darted toward Veronica. She still wouldn't meet his gaze. A long pause. The courtroom leaned forward, then a breath, and the words. "Yes," he said. His voice cracked. "I did it. I destroyed the evidence." Gasps rippled through the gallery. He swallowed hard. "But I wasn't acting alone." Veronica's fingers twitched. She didn't flinch, but a crack had formed in the mask she wore so well. "It wasn't just me," Hale continued, his voice gathering momentum like a storm. "There's an entire network. Bribes, threats, cover-ups. Every path leads back to her." He pointed straight at Veronica, and this time she blinked. A murmur rippled through the jury box. Journalists scribbled. Phones buzzed. Veronica's attorney shot to her feet. "Objection," she snapped. "This is hearsay, completely unfounded." But Judge Malcolm Grant raised his hand without hesitation. "Overruled," he said firmly. "The witness will continue." And continue he did. Hale named names, dates, transactions. He detailed late-night calls, cash handoffs, threats disguised as favors. Every word was another nail in the coffin of the empire Veronica had built. She shifted in her seat. Her lips moved as she whispered furiously to her lawyer, her control slipping with every second. The courtroom, once a stage she owned, was now her reckoning. Then came the unthinkable. From the back row of the courtroom, a man in a navy suit stood slowly. A high-ranking city official, someone no one expected to speak. "Your Honor," he said, voice low but steady, "I have information." He stepped forward, producing a thick folder. The courtroom froze. He handed it to Sofia. It's time people knew the truth. Veronica turned to him in shock. Her mouth parted in disbelief. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. The man didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, Veronica, but you've gone too far." Chaos erupted. Cameras clicked like a hailstorm. Gasps turned into chatter. Every spectator, every juror, every camera was locked on the scene unfolding. Veronica slumped back in her chair. Rage flickered across her face, then panic. Her allies were crumbling. The circle she built was collapsing in on her. From the bench, Judge Grant watched with quiet steel in his eyes. This was the moment they had fought for. He raised his gavel. "This court will reconvene tomorrow," he said firmly, silence in the frenzy. "But let it be known, justice is coming." As Veronica was led away in handcuffs, her silk suit wrinkled and damp with sweat, she glanced back over her shoulder. And for the first time in her long reign of power, the look in her eyes wasn't pride, it was fear. The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that settles deep into your chest. Reporters clutched their notepads. Victims, seated quietly with clasped hands, stared straight ahead. The jury sat motionless, eyes unreadable. No one moved, no one breathed. At the defense table, Veronica Langston stood, rigid. Gone was the commanding force of nature the city had feared for years. In its place stood a woman stripped bare, her power reduced to a trembling jaw and clenched fists. "Will the defendant please rise?" The judge's voice cut through the air. Veronica rose slowly, chin slightly lifted, one last flicker of that old bravado, but her eyes betrayed her. The confidence was a mask. Judge Malcolm Grant stared at her directly, his expression calm but resolute. "Veronica Langston," he said, his voice unwavering, "for your role in orchestrating a vast and deliberate network of corruption, bribery, and intimidation, this court sentences you to the maximum penalty under the law." The words struck like thunder. Time seemed to stop. Then, a ripple of reaction, murmurs. A woman in the gallery gasped. A man in the back bowed his head and whispered "thank you" into his hands. Veronica's shoulders sagged. Her hands, still resting on the table, trembled. As the bailiffs approached to escort her away, she turned, scanning the courtroom. But no lifeline came, no rescuing glance, no loyal ally. Just silence. The circle that had once protected her was gone. She was alone. Outside the courthouse, the street outside buzzed with energy. Protesters, supporters, and press lined the courthouse steps. Signs rose high in the air. Justice for all. No one above the law. The moment the verdict was announced, a cheer tore through the crowd. Tears of relief. Hugs from strangers. People who'd spent years feeling invisible now felt seen. Sofia Monroe stood quietly among them, not shouting, not crying, just present. The weight of months of pressure slowly lifting from her shoulders. She watched people reclaim their voices and felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time: hope. A young woman, not more than 25, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Because of you," she whispered, "my family can finally move forward." Sofia didn't reply. She just smiled, a quiet, misty smile, and nodded. Moments later, a chant started softly, then rose. "Sophie A, Sophie A." Voices from every corner of the square, not just a name, but a recognition. Sofia glanced toward the top of the courthouse steps, where Judge Grant stood quietly, hands folded, watching the scene unfold. They locked eyes, and in that moment, no words were needed. They had done it. Justice had prevailed. Veronica's final walk. The crowd fell to a hush as the doors opened. Veronica emerged, flanked by officers. Her designer suit was wrinkled and askew, her once sharp gaze now lowered, no longer the queen of power and fear, just another fallen titan in handcuffs. People stepped back to let her pass. No one cheered now, no one mocked. It was something else, witnessing consequence. The car door slammed behind her with a heavy finality, and just like that, she was gone. Judge Grant turned back toward the building, his heart full, not with pride, but with peace. This wasn't just the end of a trial. It was the beginning of healing. The fall of Veronica Langston didn't just shift headlines, it shifted lives. For years, she had siphoned millions, redirecting public funds into her empire, buying silence, feeding corruption. But now every dollar she stole was being tracked, traced, and finally returned. Neighborhoods that had been left to rot began to stir awake. At PS 112, a school once mocked for its leaking roofs and broken windows, scaffolding now covered the walls. Construction crews arrived at dawn, and laughter echoed as children ran across freshly paved sidewalks. In Eastbrook, a community center reopened its doors, the same doors that had been shut for 5 years due to budget cuts. Now, music filled the halls, teenagers played basketball again, and single mothers found support classes they'd once begged for. And in the heart of South End, cracked streets were finally being repaved. Each filled pothole a silent victory for those who'd been ignored for far too long. It was more than rebuilding, it was reclaiming. A letter to the judge. At a small park tucked between apartment blocks, a mother watched her children swing high into the air. Their laughter carried across the breeze. She sat on a bench with a notebook in her lap, scratched, folded, and worn. Her handwriting was uneven, but her words were steady. Dear Judge Grant, for years people like us didn't matter. We were just the forgotten, but you didn't forget us. You stood up when others were afraid to. And because of that, my kids get to dream again. We get to breathe again. You didn't just sentence a criminal. You gave us back our lives. Thank you for choosing to do what was right, even when it was hard. Marcus Grant sat in his chambers that night. The city glowed outside his window, and in his hands was that letter, creased at the corners, the ink smudged by someone's thumb. He read it once, then again, and then slowly he folded it and placed it beside a worn photograph of his mother. No trophy, no press clipping, just this. Because this quiet truth was why he did it. The city breathes again. Downtown, murals sprang up, colors bursting against gray brick walls, painted faces of everyday heroes, children holding scales of justice, elders with eyes that had seen too much. It was art born from suffering, but shaped by healing. A corner store on Park Avenue reopened, this time under new ownership. No more bribes to keep the lights on. No more inspections that demanded hush money. People were walking taller now, smiling longer, daring to believe. And at the rebuilt Franklin Square playground, Sofia Monroe stood quietly as a group of kids played tag. A little girl waved at her, recognizing her from the news. Sofia smiled, then turned toward the community leader walking beside her. We couldn't have done this without you, he said, gripping her hand. You did this, she replied softly. We just gave you the chance. The bigger fight. This wasn't just about taking down one corrupt woman. It was about breaking the belief that power makes you untouchable, and proving that no matter how broken a city becomes, when people rise together, justice doesn't just survive, it wins. This story wasn't just about a courtroom showdown. It was about something deeper, something raw, something real. It was about faith, not the kind you talk about in church pews, but the kind you have to fight for when no one's watching. The kind of faith that says justice still matters, truth still matters, and good people can still make a difference. Marcus Grant and Sofia Monroe hadn't set out to become heroes. They just refused to stay silent. They fought not for glory, not for headlines, but for the invisible, the unheard, the folks who don't have lobbyists or lawyers, the mothers, the children, the small business owners who were crushed under the weight of corruption. This wasn't just their fight. It was ours, because every time someone like Veronica Langston rises, it's not because she's brilliant, it's because too many of us stayed quiet. The cost of silence. Rebecca Stanton knew that too well. She'd been Veronica's sister, her ally, her silent witness for years. And every check she cashed, every lie she ignored, added another brick to the empire her sister built. But silence has a price, and for Rebecca, it came in the form of sleepless nights, broken trust, and a haunting truth that wouldn't go away until she finally stood up. Betraying her sister didn't bring her peace, but it brought the city justice, and some wounds, even when they hurt, are worth opening if they help others heal. No one wins alone. Veronica Langston had money. She had influence, but in the end, what she didn't have was the people, and that's what destroyed her. It wasn't just Marcus or Sofia or Rebecca. It was all of us. Every brave voice that spoke up, every protester who marched, every whistleblower who came forward, every person who believed this city could still be something better. Veronica's downfall wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a mirror that asked us all, what kind of world are we willing to fight for? And what are we willing to risk to get there? The last word, justice isn't easy. It doesn't always look clean or quick or comfortable, but justice is worth it. Because when the dust settles and the crowds go home and the cameras turn off, what matters isn't who got the headline. What matters is who still has hope. Your turn. If this story moved you, don't just scroll past it. Hit that like button. Leave a comment below. Have you ever seen power corrupt someone close to you? What did you do? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Black Women, where we tell stories that dig deep, challenge injustice, and uplift every voice that's been silenced for too long. Because this fight isn't over, it's just beginning. And we're fighting it together